Welcome to Discover the Difference, a podcast brought to you by C3. My name is Jamie Reed, and I'll be your host alongside my co-host, Gabriel Earl. Today we have Scott Mann on the show, and Scott's story is so inspirational. He's been a New York Times best-selling author, 3-time TedX speaker, and now he's a playwright. And it's all around the basis of storytelling through the lens of our warfighters in America. Scott uses his storytelling to walk us through a journey of his life where he dealt with everything from thoughts of suicide to finding purpose and his role in the world and how to impact others. You're gonna learn so much from a guy who's been through it all in a very emotional, energetic, and absolutely inspiring way. Enjoy this podcast with Scott Mann. Well, will you start by just taking us back to that story of being 14 years old and becoming introduced to the Green Berets?
Sure. I grew up in a little logging town in Mount Ida, Arkansas. We didn't even have a stoplight. And as a kid, I always wanted to be John Rambo. But I actually looked more like Johnny Appleseed. I mean, I was a runt of a kid, very, very small. We moved a lot as a kid, and so living in these little logging towns was always challenging for me. I was always kind of on the outside.
Military family?
My dad was a forest ranger.
Oh, okay.
So it was a lot like the military. We would travel to these little towns, and then he would go fight fire from the late winter all the way to the fall, and so it was a lot like that. Yeah. But anyway, living in this town of Mount Ida, Arkansas, I was in Harold's Soda Shop was the name of the soda shop, and this guy walks in, and every head in the place just turns and looks at him. It was like a gunfighter walking into a saloon, and he looked unlike anything I'd ever seen, like a uniform pressed to perfection and these big shiny boots, and he was young, 28 maybe, but he had so many medals it looked like a fruit salad. And then he had this weird looking soft green hat on his head that he took off, stuck in his waistband. And he just kind of sauntered into the soda shop, really didn't strut or, he just sauntered in, really unassuming kind of guy. But everybody's just staring at this dude. And the minute I saw him, I knew that's what I wanted to be. And I had no clue what he was. None. I just knew
whatever it is.
Whatever that is, that's what I'm going to do. And I just went up and started talking to him. And everybody's like laughing at me because I'm telling you, like I weighed maybe 95 pounds.
What was it about that look that attracted you?
It was just the way, it was his confidence, but there was something about him and that Green Beret.
An aura.
Yeah, there was something, there was an attraction to him in terms of like what he had done that I couldn't quite put my finger on, but you could just feel it coming off of him. This unassuming confidence.
Was that just like a connection to movies or just the feeling?
Well, one, we didn't get a lot of strangers in our town.
Okay.
But seeing a guy like this, and I was a big dreamer. All I dreamed about was getting out and doing something where people would see me. Because I literally felt like I was invisible all the time and, pretty severely bullied and just always on the outside looking in. And this guy was definitely not on the outside looking in. Everybody was looking at this dude.
Was he from that town or
His
why was he
dad
there?
Was the owner of that soda shop. And he was there visiting. And what was cool about him, his name was Mark. I went up to him and I asked him, I'm like, who are you? What do you do? And he sat down with me and took the time to actually talk to me about what he did for a living as a Green Beret. And he explained to me what a Green Beret was and what they did. And, for me, it's hard to explain, but like the fact that he saw me and sat down with me in that moment and he talked to me as if I were somebody he knew I was going to be a Green Beret. He wasn't like, placating me and just here, and to this day, like and Monty will tell you, if some young kid contacts me and says, hey, can you talk to me about special, I will stop everything and talk to them immediately.
Right.
Because like that conversation he had with me in that moment, that was it, man. I knew from that moment on, that's what I was going to do.
You guys still in contact?
We are. I stayed in touch with him all the way up until my retirement.
Wow.
He mentored me. And he was such a model. But what he told me in that conversation was, Green Berets are different than Navy SEALs. They're different than Army Rangers. Those guys are the best in the world at coming in on a target and taking it down. and then moving off the target very quickly. And they usually do the mission themselves. And he's like, Scott, Green Berets are different. They work by, with, and through indigenous people. They help them stand up on their own. They'll jump into an area with a small team, connect with an elder or tribal chief, and then they'll just get surrounded on purpose. They'll immerse themselves in the language, the culture, the environment, and they might stay for months, even years, to build the relationship, build the social capital with that community, with that village, with that partner force, and then they'll help them fight back on their own from the bottom up. And that's what Green Berets do. They're like a combination of John Wick, Lawrence of Arabia, and the Verizon guy. You know what I mean? Like, they're these relationship-based connectors, and they're lethal. But what their real strength is, they can go into a village or a province with 12 and then ride out with 12,000.
Wow.
You know, and that for me, man, like, sign me up. You know, right then I was ready to go, and he's like, dude, you're 14. You know, you're gonna have to wait, but here's what you can do to get ready. So that was transformational for me, man. I knew from 14 that that's what I was going to do.
What was the next steps that a 14-year-old takes?
Well, I started like researching and training and, you know, reading up on, I got the Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't know if I even remember that anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I read everything I could. I saw Rambo probably 50 times. I had a National Geographic that I would read from cover to cover. I'd found in my dad's attic about Green Berets in Vietnam. I would interview Green Berets. It turns out our sheriff in the town, he never talked about it, but his Sheriff Carmack, he was a former Green Beret in Vietnam.
Wow.
So I got connected to him, and he connected me to other Green Berets from Vietnam. I was obsessed with this notion of being a Green Beret. And so I built a network out and talked to people every chance I could. And by the time I decided too that I wanted to be like Mark. I wanted to be a Special Forces officer. I wanted to be a detachment commander. And I knew I wanted to work in Central and South America. I had met Green Berets that had done that. So I already had it mapped out. I just needed to go to college, go to ROTC, get some BS degree that would allow me to go as fast as possible, get my commission, and then try out for Special Forces.
Wow.
So is that what you did?
It is, but the problem was, like, when I got in the Army, you still have to wait another 5 years as an officer before you can try out. They don't take lieutenants. You have to be a captain. So I went to hard schools like Air Assault School, Airborne School, where you jump out of a perfectly good airplane, Ranger School, where they take away your food and your stuff. I failed every single one of them, like twice. Like, I failed every school I went to my first few years in the Army because I was so small, and it was hard for me. But I just stayed there, kept recycling until finally they got tired of me and I'd make it through. And then when I could finally try out for Special Forces, I actually went through that course twice, and finally made it. And I got my Green Beret in 1996.
It sounds like you went through a lot of adversity during that 5 years. How did what kept you in it?
You know, that's a great question. And one of the things that I learned as a kid growing up in a logging town when you're small is that when you get knocked down in life, you've really got two very, very simple choices. You can stay down or you can get up. And I did learn how to just keep getting back up and just being too stupid to quit. You know, my dad and mom instilled that in me. And I knew that if I quit any of those schools, I would not be able to go back. You know, that was it. And for me, this was my dream. And so I would just, whenever I failed, they would say, you can recycle, but you're going to have to wait another 5 weeks for the next course to start. I would just drop my duffel bag and be like, okay,
all right, I'm here.
Let me know what date that is. I'll be cleaning the latrine. And that's how I lived my life. And it was, yes, it was a lot of adversity and a lot of, like, you know, I can remember one thing in Ranger School. I failed Ranger School. And I remember the original graduating class. I was in the recycle holding pen so long that the graduating class came back and was getting ready to graduate. And I was pulling weeds out of the worm pit next to the parade field in this muck worm pit. I'm pulling weeds where they're parading by rehearsing for graduation. And I remember feeling so
like demoralized and low and just like, what am I doing? I have no business being here, you know? And that was, you know, points like that in my life happened a lot. But to your point, those were actually the things way more than graduating the school that showed up and saved me in combat. And when I got to points in combat where I was making decisions and it felt that same way, those were actually the moments that showed me and taught me how to deal with them, not the course itself.
So
it was what I did between the courses and with the failures. Do I go home or do I stay in it and keep chasing? That was the stuff that actually gave me the grit that I needed, you know, even now.
Well, you reflected on the physical deficiencies, as you look back now, was there a mental gain that occurred to go from the first failure to passing any one of those courses?
I think the mental game is where I had a competitive advantage because my mother and father were so amazing and how they taught my brother and me on how to navigate life. You know, my dad was a runt. He was a firefighter. My mom was extremely poor growing up in Appalachia and a school teacher. And they just, you know, they showed us that you never quit anything. You can do anything else, but you don't quit. And so they instilled in me an attitude, a mindset that if you believe that you can do it, you can do it. And you can't let anybody else tell you that. And I know a lot of other people have been instilled with that. But for me personally, that mindset was the only thing that got me through. I didn't have any other attributes, literally.
Yeah.
Like I was a liability in every sense of the word, you know. But what I did have was a mental attitude that I wouldn't quit. And actually, it turns out that special forces, that's exactly what they were looking for.
Yeah.
Right.
Everything else they can develop.
Well, you mentioned also you were a dreamer.
Yeah, big time. Still am.
Where did that come from?
I think that probably comes from both my grandfathers. They were dreamers and visionaries. My dad is a visionary and a dreamer. He's still with us. He's had 2 bouts with cancer and a stroke. An old mountain man, and he's actually working to restore the American chestnut tree.
Wow.
That went to functional extinction in the early 1900s, and they're actually very close. And he can totally see that tree back in the woods again, even though he'll never see it. That's the kind of commitment he has to his vision and his dream. And, you know, he's unwavering. He's almost 80. And he just gave a TED talk a few years ago about and so
Wow.
that just kind of that unwavering commitment to your vision to where, and a lot of that is storytelling, is the ability to have a narrative, a story in your mind that you tell yourself every day that gives new patterns to your brain. And I think that's been critical for me, is to be able to tell myself a story of what my future looks like, even though it's not here yet.
You know, if you profile your personality just from a few of the things you've said, what comes to mind is visionary. You know, you have to have that vision. And there's a connectedness as well that's coming through there, which in our relationship, he's the connector, I'm more the visionary. Yeah. Those two things coming together are really unique. Like, how do you feel those parts of your personality intentionally and play them in different ways? Or
I do. And I, you know, like you guys, as a small business owner, I've continued to try to become more intentional and aware of that language and that grammar that I never had words for. You know, that's one of the things that, like you talked about, like, you know, visionary, connector, integrator, that notion that there are people on the planet who that are deeply intentional about vision. And then there are people on the planet that are deeply intentional about the realization of that vision through implementation. You put those two together.
That's dangerous.
And it's very compelling, right?
Right.
And so I have become more aware of that in terms of the grammar of it. And then once you have a language for something, then all of a sudden your ability to like recognize it in yourself and implement it in your life takes on a whole new meaning. So absolutely. And I'm still learning. You know, I also have a lot of limitations as a visionary. I'm like ready, fire, aim, you know, and it drives my team crazy sometimes. But
meaning you need to slow down, or?
Well, meaning that I'll come up with a vision and I'll sprint off like the roadrunner, you know, in the direction of it, and the rest of the team's going, "What the hell?
Where'd he go? Where'd he go?
You know, and, you know, I got to circle back. And, okay, here's the plan. You know?
I forgot to communicate what we're doing here,
but I'm so excited about it.
What's an example of that?
Oh, good Lord. My wife's rolling her eyes right now.
Yeah, she's like, can I join after all?
Because she is, in all aspects of our life, she is our integrator. She is the one who, when she hears my vision, man, she fights for it more than anyone I've ever seen. But I will tell you, an example of it recently has been the play Last Out that we've written. That I've written. I started writing it, 6 years ago, as a way to heal myself. And then at some point in that process, now imagine 23 years in the Army, multiple combat tours. We're finally retired. We're finally got our leadership company and our speaking business going. And I go to Monty and I say, so I know I'm writing this play. I think I want to learn how to act and perform it at 50. And she's you gotta be kidding me. And,
like, here we go.
And so
you're going to be in Beverly Hills soon, you know?
And this thing has unearthed all of these things from our past that, frankly, we had buried. You know, when we wrote the play, we wanted to show civilians the cost of war in a way that movies and books don't. And so we talked about this, my character, but also the military family. And so in writing this thing, she helped me write. It had unearthed a lot. And all of a sudden now I want to act. I want to perform it. And so that means I'm going to have to learn how to act and do all that. And we had this kind of a knockdown drag out around it because she's learned with my visions that like, I got to call him on this. And she said, why do you want to do this so bad? And I just looked at her and I said, I'm going to die if I don't. I don't know, but I have to tell this story from the stage. And she goes, well, I guess we got a play to do then, you know? And she started to really integrate and put into realization the programmatics of how this would happen. But that's because we're in town to do the play, like that's what comes to mind. But pretty much every initiative we've done since retirement has been some vision that comes to me. And then Monty and our team figuring out a way to actually make it happen.
Well, there's so much that led up to this play, but I want to.
I kind of got in front of it.
Since we're on the play, let's dig into that. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what the play's about? How I mean, we heard the beginning of how it came about, but how did you get it from this idea and this to where it is today?
Can we frame it real quick too? Because with the point he's making, you write a book, Operation Pineapple Express, right? And then you come out with Game Changers, and then multiple TEDx talks, right? Mm-hmm. So those are different mediums that you're using in a form of expression to either soothe and or educate. How do you go from books to TEDx and then be like, I need one more different way of either dealing with it or educating people and take that to a stage? Because that, when we were talking before this, that's just a really unique, different way of expressing that we don't hear that in people we've interacted with.
So I appreciate that framing. When I got out of the Army, I'd been in about 23 years. I did multiple tours in Afghanistan. And in 2012, I decided it was time to retire. My dad had always told me, you'll know when. If you love it, you'll know when it's time. And for me, we had been doing this program in Afghanistan where we were working with villagers and helping these villagers stand up on their own, kind of a modern day Magnificent Seven called Village Stability Operations. That's what the book Game Changers is about.
Right.
And it was a real prolific change in how we prosecuted the war. I mean, it was so effective that Osama bin Laden actually wrote a note to his intelligence chief about one of our VSO sites that this was the greatest threat to the insurgency in Afghanistan. Wow. And then in 2012, we started pulling the plug on it. We started pulling our teams out of the village. Retribution started to come in, and the villagers were actually, most of the ones I recruited were killed because we did not stand beside them. We changed our strategy again.
Why was that?
Our government did not feel like our teams being out in the village was worth the risk. And they were getting pressure from the Afghan government, who didn't like us being out in those villages either because it was affecting their patronage. So they pulled us back. And it was a real blow to the partnership relationships we had as Green Berets. And for me, it was the final blow. I didn't like the way things were going in Afghanistan. Over the years, I'd seen I did not like the direction. I felt like we were not fully in it to win it. And the careerism in my special operations community at the senior levels was such that I wanted no part of it.
So you kind of saw this abandonment of the hearts and minds.
I witnessed it firsthand. They were calling my cell phone asking me to help them as they were murdered, and so it had a profound effect on me. I told Monty, I'm ready to hang up the cleats. And not, and I retired on my terms, 23 years in, I was a lieutenant colonel. I had a book to write, Game Changers. I had a job as a contractor. The boys, Cody, Cooper, and Braden, were still in high school and junior high. And we finally were going to have a chance to live our life in Florida. So I hung it up. I retired. But I turned down 3 opportunities for battalion command in doing that. I did not take, the advancement to the next level because I was ready to move on. And within 18 months of hanging up my desert boots and starting a job as a contractor and living a civilian life, I had gone from the top of my game, this high performer that was living his dream, to a guy that walked around his house, maybe showered once a week. Most of the time I stayed in like old, sweat clothes or my robe. My mood swings were so severe that my boys would get up and leave the room when I walked in. And, Monty, bless her heart, like she was just beside herself. She didn't know what was happening with me. And there were times when like she would just have to pick me up off the floor. You know, I had no purpose. I had no identity. And on around 18 months after retiring, we had an argument over finances, and she left, and I found myself standing in my closet holding a 45.
Wow.
And no intention of coming out. And had some things not happened that day that intervened, I wouldn't have. But as a result, I did, and I started to gradually look for something, some kind of purpose, some kind of identity. I knew I had something to say. That's what kept coming back to me. I've got something to say, but I don't know how to say it. So I was going to these like workshops and things and trying to figure out a way to do something that would give me my relevance back. And I went to this world's greatest speaker thing out in California, and there was, I didn't care for it. It was a bunch
California or the
well,
content?
I love California. But the event itself was a lot of kind of rah, rah, rah and clapping, and, it just wasn't my thing. But then they had the speaker coming up. His name was Bo Eason, former NFL football player turned playwright turned actor, right? And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I want to at least see this, So this guy comes out, and he walks out on the stage, and he's like prowling the stage. He's moving like an NFL free safety. He was voted the dirtiest safety in the NFL in like 1988. And he's up there telling the story of how he blew his knee out and how he's being carried off the field. And he's thinking, I'm going to go to prison if I don't find a way to take the TNT inside of me. Because all I know how to do is to hit a guy so hard that you smell smoke, right? And if I don't take that TNT and turn it into something positive, I'm going to go to prison. And I thought, dear God, like that's my life, And so I went up to him after he talked, and I was like, I don't know who you are, I'm going to work with you. And I think it freaked him out, but I told him what I did.
Green Beret moment.
Yeah, and he said,
you weren't grabbing onto his leg when you said
right.
that.
He's like, right. And but he said, no, man, we'll work together. Get in touch. He gave me his contact info, and that guy mentored me for like 2 years and showed me how to use storytelling the way that he had healed himself as he left his identity as a free safety who blew his knee out 7 times and then learned to act. And he wrote a play called Run of the Litter about his journey, him and Tony Eason, who played for the Patriots, his journey to become a NFL player. And it went off Broadway. And so, he became my mentor in storytelling, and he showed me how to use storytelling to heal myself, to bridge that civil military gap, and to use narrative as the vehicle by which I took my struggle, my pain, and I repurposed it into the service of others to make myself relatable and where people located themselves in my story. So I started doing it from the stage, started doing it with other veterans. I started writing books, and all of a sudden I found like, wow, like I'm a storyteller. This is my outlet. And it just went on and on for me. So in the framing perspective and the contextual perspective, that's what happened for me is I found another mark, another soda shop moment that my next level was storyteller. And so I've spent the last 10 years of my life, what Tim Ferriss is to high performance, I've tried to be to storytelling and to just literally fanatically immerse myself in every aspect.
Can you dig into that a little bit more on why storytelling is so healing for you and healing for others?
Well, it turns out that we know more about storytelling now than we've ever known. There is an ability to hook up to the brain and measure mental activity while storytelling and other interpersonal things are happening. And that to me is so exciting. David Phillips recently did a study, first of all, to show you the antithesis of this. David Phillips, a strategic communicator, did a study called Death by PowerPoint. And he hooked people up to EEG machines as PowerPoints were displayed. And what he found was, on average, the average audience forgets 90% of your content 30 seconds after you say thank you for your time. And the reason is because PowerPoint and all of this other short form of communications that we've adopted in this modern mechanistic world, it engages working memory. It doesn't engage long-term memory. Yep. And so the brain doesn't even retain what you've said to it, right? Storytelling has been around for 70,000 years. It's been with us, but we've only had coded language for 10,000. So we've been telling stories through vocal tonality and points and grunts around a campfire for 70,000 years. And what we've learned is that storytelling is actually a strategic asset because storytelling allows people to locate themselves in your story. So if I'm talking about 10,000 years ago why saber-toothed tigers make crappy pets, like you're going to lean in and listen autobiographically because your life depends on that. And then you will remember that story as if it were your own lived experience. You will remember it as at a sensorial level. You know, and that's why the best storytellers, they talk about what it felt like and what it smelled like. And in a TED Talk, we're literally, it's called narrative transformation or transportation. We go for the ride. We literally locate ourselves in that story, and we have a sensorial experience that is as if we lived it ourselves, and that creates reciprocity and context and meaning. And all of a sudden now we're connected with the storyteller in ways that we feel as if we've lived life with them. And that is a biological asset that we've just forgotten in this world. So
it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's so crazy because we've had our own sales team come together and go in a Jeffersonian dinner through a hero's journey to learn how to cast what they say in a storytelling manner.
Yeah.
And literally the company Rick works for is called Quinto, which is story in Spanish. And that's exactly what we're trying to get people to understand, is that they connect to an emotion, not to content on a slide. And if you can connect to their emotions, you can impact them. And if you can't, then you're not gonna.
There's a certain thing, you're spot on, and there's a certain thing that I, as a Green Beret, the reason this resonated with me is we have to go into places and we have to make connections in 5 minutes or we're dead. You know, you've got an elder sitting there tickling the trigger of his AK-47, deciding whether or not to dispatch you.
That's pretty important.
You have to make a connection. And we've always done it off instinct, right? Like we have this, you know, you can build rapport and you're graded on that. But the exciting thing to me about what we're talking about here, particularly in the realm of storytelling, is that there is an art and science to storytelling now that we're starting to understand that not only did our grandparents know what the hell they were talking about, like there is a level of biological necessity to storytelling that if you understand the human operating system, if you understand that, for example, we're meaning-seeking, emotional, social storytellers who struggle, or in other words, we're a mess, then you have a competitive edge because we all crave story. You know, we all crave storytelling. Little kids, mommy, tell me a story. Mommy, tell me a story. Mommy, and we need. And the last thing I'll say on this, because I want to get y'all's perspective on this, because I know you use it, but there's this book by Kendall Haven called Story Proof. And he's actually done a lot of this brain measurement activity. And one of the things that he's found is that the brain is a metaphorical pattern matching organ. So in other words, the brain has a mandate to make sense of the world. It's a sense making organ, and it uses metaphor and pattern to do it. This is like that. This is like that. And so neural story maps are how the brain makes sense of the world. So if you show a PowerPoint deck to somebody, they're not going to look at the data. They're going to look at the data and then they're going to tell themselves a story that makes sense of the data. But the finding is that several things happen when that, if you just present the data, one, they're probably going to get it wrong to some degree. And two, they're going to be agitated that the brain, which really doesn't like to spend a lot of energy, had to come up with a story to make sense of your 75 slides. And so you've already put your listener in an agitated state, right? And so rather than conveying your idea, you've actually created a narrative insurgent who is actually turning on you because of just presenting this raw data and the work that they're having to do to make sense of your stuff, versus nesting your ideas, your thoughts in a story that passes through the listener's brain with little or no interruption.
Can you give us an example of that in your experience in Afghanistan, where you are in a place where, you know, maybe you're not able to communicate from a language perspective? How do you tell a story and just bring people along to that story without the language?
So language is always a barrier, you know, and it's always a superficial barrier. But I tell people that language is 10,000 years old. We've been telling stories for 70,000 years. So yes, I mean, you do need to have some kind of working language capability when you're sitting down with someone, or at least an interpreter. But what I found was that language, culture, ethnicity in tribal Afghanistan was not as daunting as one might think. For example, when we were trying to move into those villages, I was a guy who would go, and my transaction was, I had to sit down with these elders who've been through 40 years of war, who've been through 10 years of U.S. forces kicking their doors down at night, and then say, I'm from the government, how do you like me so far, right? We'd like to live in your village, and we'd like your sons to fight alongside us, right? That's the ask.
That's a big ask.
That's a big ask.
Yeah.
10 years into the war, but what I found was we're sitting underneath a mulberry tree, and some of these elders speak broken English. I speak some Pashto. I have my cultural advisor Bashir with me, and we would just talk. And most of the story, I would start with thoughtful, open-ended questions that allowed them to tell me stories about their pain and their goals. For example, I would ask them a question that always gained immediate answer. I would say, what was life like before the Soviets were here? What was life like in this village? That blue mosque up there, what was it like? And their eyes would kind of get misty and they would look at each other and they would start to tell me about the days back in the early 1970s when there was no war going on, and when they would go to the lawn at the mosque on Friday and have picnics, and their kids would play, and they could drive down the road with no IEDs, no ambushes, and they would literally and I would just ask questions about that with an intention of pure discovery. The storytelling was coming from them back to me, right? And then at some point, I might say something like, well, would it be all right if I share a story with you about my background? And they'd be like, yeah. And I would tell them about, tobacco farming. I would talk about my family growing up with tobacco farming, which my dad says is the only farming in the United States where you slowly starve to death, and it's all done by hand. It's all using like primitive technology, low tech technology. And I would tell them stories about my brother and me falling out of the barn, and us out there as a family picking tobacco leaves. And that's where I come from. And then I know that you think that you're speaking to the United States government right now, but that's the world I come from. I come from a family of tobacco farmers, subsistence farmers. And I'm not the U.S. government. I'm just Scott. And I'd just like to get to know you more. And all of a sudden they'd start to tell me stories about their farming and drying tomatoes out on rocks. And the point is, like, in real time, we're using stories as a way to move ideas back and forth. And all of a sudden you've got a level of accelerated reciprocity that was not there before. Yeah. Right. That was not there. There's levels of connection and autobiographical listening that has occurred that we're now having we're not talking about the Taliban. We're not talking about democracy. We're talking about tobacco farming and other hard forms. But the universal singular of struggle is at the epicenter of this conversation. And now all of a sudden, 6 weeks later, those dudes are up on a rooftop slugging it out with the Taliban next to us, and we have no authority over them. And to this day, I still stay in contact with those folks.
So obviously there's a lot of tactical training in the Green Berets to execute. Is the storytelling and some of the social structure that you were utilizing there, is that taught in the Green Beret program? Was it innate in you? Did you figure it out?
That's a great question. Initially, so Green Berets have been around since 1952, I think. And so they run a course out in the culminating course, and it's in the play, by the way. It's called Robin Sage. It's the world's largest role-playing exercise. So to culminate your training after 18 months or so in Special Forces, you go into this fictional country called Pineland in eastern North Carolina. It covers 5 counties and 5 generations of local farmers, Subway shop owners. They are role players in this scenario. And you jump into this country that's been occupied by outside forces, and all of the sheriff, everybody's in on it. And it's 5 counties of role players. And you and your little student team have to navigate through that and mobilize them as partisans, use them as an auxiliary, and get them to fight. And then, what's funny about it is it looks so similar to the kind of situations you see in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the key is, for years, we've always been evaluated on our ability to build rapport with locals and keep rapport. And if you lose it, you're out of the course. But it's always been on instinct. There's not any real formal courses taught on the actual aspects of social capital, human connection, rapport building, storytelling, active listening, narrative competence. And so it was after I got out of the Army that I got asked to go back to the Q course and start teaching a more deliberate approach to human connection. And I did that for several years, all the way up until COVID. And what I found was, even in the arena of special forces, where we thrive on this, it's mostly instinct. And my sense of things is, in the modern world we live in here, in the business world, it's even worse. Most business owners, most client-facing people, most relationship managers, they're operating purely off instinct when it comes to human connection. And they're not leveraging the science that we know about human connection, reciprocity, social capital that's out there and available to us. They're not using those tools in a way, and they're leaving tons of value on the table.
Wow. So, a little bit, not confusion, but you referenced going to your wife and saying, now we're going to do plays. But it sounded like when you had that Bo moment, you had the full vision. Was that true, or did you level up multiple times and the vision evolve from books to TedX to plays? Like what was it?
It was very much a soda shop moment in that I saw in Bo what I wanted to become, but I didn't know exactly what it was. I knew the way that he was prowling that stage, the way that I'm sitting there, I needed to pee and needed to pee really bad, and I was not going to go to the bathroom until he was done, regardless of my outcome. Right? I wasn't leaving. And I looked around the room and everybody else has that same look. They're not leaving. Like he literally held the room in his hands. And I knew for me that is what I want. Whether that's, I didn't know if it was exactly that, but I knew I wanted to be him in a version of him, a better version of him. And the same way that when I saw Mark, I located myself in his story. And so I called Monty, because that's what I always do when I have a new idea, is I go to Monty and I'm like, okay, I think I found, and I think she was so relieved that I had found something and was so excited about it that, it was like, yeah, let's absolutely do it. But it was in my work with Bo as I started to unpack my own storytelling. And by the way, it was not easy because I had accumulated so much survivor's guilt and trauma and moral injury and a lot of other things that so many people have, both military and non, have accumulated. What Bo required of me is you're going to have to access your struggle. No struggle, no story, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to have to tie into those pivotal moments, and you're going to have to take the body armor off, not pack it on. And if you want to be relatable to people, if you want them to locate themselves in your story, you have to have the generosity to repurpose your struggle in the service of them through your stories. And you're going to have to be willing to access that. And so he made me do things like, as I was developing my story, to say the names of my guys that I hadn't said in years that I lost. And I would lay on the floor in the fetal position, and cry on the stage while I'm trying to say their names. And he would just stand there. And he would, you got this. And I would, one by one, I would say their names and I worked through that story. And so the first aspect of my storytelling journey was to heal myself, was to realign my lived experience with my narrative, with my story. And once that started to happen and I told it out loud for the first or second time, it was like, holy crap.
What did that feel like?
So terrifying, so terrifying. The first time I ever told my story to a room, Bo brought me on his stage. He's like, the first time you do this, you're going to do this on my stage. And I was throwing up. I was so nervous. I was like, people don't want to hear this crap. I'm an imposter. I'm a fraud, all that stuff. And, but he had given me the tools to do it. And when I did it, it was standing ovation. Like people were crying. And, it was transformational for me. And I knew in that moment right there, I'm like, okay, I'm a storyteller.
It's just so crazy. I mean, your story is totally different than us, but everything you're saying on a smaller business scale, you said in business, this isn't hitting. It's 100%, right, Mia? It's 100% what we're trying to get our team to do. And that imposter syndrome you referenced, that's the starting block. People don't feel like their story has an audience.
They do.
And it doesn't matter how vertical it is, it does. And then the second piece to it is the vulnerability. Yeah. It's the key ingredient, number one thing that makes people like you.
Yeah.
But we're unwilling to acknowledge that we have an audience and that how they're going to like us is through that vulnerability.
Absolutely. The thing I always, and again, remember that what I'm coming at you with is not theory. This is stuff I've seen work in the most trust depleted places on earth, right? And humans are remarkably similar in how we're wired to navigate the world. And, our brains have not evolved much in 250,000 years. We're still ancient brains trying to make sense of this modern world we're in. And so the way our brains navigate the world is we're social creatures. We actually sit on top of the food chain because of our ability to connect with other humans. We don't have fur, fangs, or claws. And stories are how we have decided whether or not to connect with another human for the most part. And if you have a problem with vulnerability, and I know some people do, maybe try substituting it with relatability. Right? The key for us as leaders and influencers is to be relatable to the other party and for them to relate to us. Yep. And stories are one of the most powerful ways to do that. And so is struggle. Struggle is that universal singular where people locate themselves in your story because of your struggle. And they see you as relatable. So one thing that I would just throw out there is to think about being relatable to the other party, if vulnerability kind of jams you up, because if you really are intentional about being relatable, by definition, you will be vulnerable.
I like that because I think that vulnerability in general is like seen as a weakness, right? Which really it's the opposite, right? It's a strength.
It is.
Absolutely.
And
It's
so
a huge strength.
how does, especially I would think in the military, people, that kind of have that, macho experience. And how did you in your experience, like pull that out of people that were, in your command and they reported to you and all that?
Well, one of the things that I had to do was one of the things is I stopped calling it storytelling and I started calling it narrative competence. Because if you talk about storytelling, you can see like the tough guys in the finance sector and the tech industry and all the left brain industries and the military go like, they literally pull back. But if you say, what we're going to work on is narrative competence, it is the application of purposeful storytelling in real time to meet your goals. And they're like, oh yeah, that sounds awesome.
Now you're talking my language.
So it was reframing it.
So what I would normally do is I would open with a story. And I would usually open with a story about my lived experience and a pivotal moment that came with it, whether it was the Green Beret in the soda shop, if I'm talking to business owners, if I'm talking to veterans about suicide, because I do not pull back from that. Like I've lost too many friends and my own experience. I'll tell a story about me standing in that closet. That's why I did a TED Talk. What happens is my experience has been, is if you are intentional and authentic in your pivotal moment and you repurpose your scars in the service of others and you tell your story from that place, people locate themselves in your story. They locate them, even if they didn't serve in the military. There's something in their story they'll find in your story that will transport them into your narrative bubble where they can process their own life in the safety of your narrative. That's where the generosity comes in, and that's where the reciprocity comes in. That's why when we hear a storyteller that is really trained and does it right, we literally go into a trance when they're talking.
That's why the Bo story was so transformational for you.
Yeah, and so what I found when I'm dealing with folks that are resistant, and many people are in today's modern age because we use short form communications, we've moved away from storytelling. The first thing I do is I tell them a story that usually draws them in emotionally, because I can take kind of the tough guy approach as a former Green Beret, and I can start there and then take them down the journey of my transformational storytelling. And then I follow it right up with the hard science, the hard data that, hey, 90% of what you're saying is being forgotten 30 seconds after you're done with your PowerPoint deck. You're creating narrative insurgents. Like all of the evidence is there that like what you're using right now is actually hurting you. And storytelling is an asset available to you that you're not even tapping into.
We've got to ask him to talk to our team. Like, this is 100% in the pocket of everything we're training our team, right? And if you're willing at some later time, I mean, but I just love how you connected it to the business world.
Oh, yeah.
Everything you're saying is such a powerful lesson for people in the business world to wrap their brain around.
Oh,
it's 100% purposeful.
I've been out for 10 years, and the bulk of my work now is in the business arena. I work with senior leadership teams, client-facing professionals, sales reps, but also founders of nonprofits. And my whole focus is to take that old school interpersonal skill approach and apply it in the modern world of low trust, distraction, and disengagement, and use the innate skills that we have that have gone dormant to influence people in ways that are authentic and moves them towards reciprocity. And storytelling is at the heart of it. If you want my honest assessment, and I work in all industries these days, and I study it, work it hard. I mean, even what we did with Pineapple Express, when Afghanistan collapsed and a bunch of old fart veterans had to get on the phone and try to rescue our partners, I got on a phone with a diplomat named JP who was inside the airfield. And my buddy was 4 feet from the perimeter of the Marines, about to be tossed out, no paperwork at all, right? And I had this phone number to this diplomat named JP, and we called him, and he's like, you got 1 minute, because you can imagine how much his phone's being blown up.
Right.
And so in 1 minute, We told the story about our friend Nizam, about how he had gone to Afghan Special Forces, about how he had been shot through the face defending U.S. Green Berets, had even gone to our Q course at Fort Bragg. He was a certified Green Beret, and he's 4 feet from your wire, and he's going to be swinging from a lamppost if you don't pull him in right now. And in that 1 minute, he paused and he goes, huh, I was a Green Beret before I was a diplomat. We got to take care of our own. Tell your boy to say pineapple as loud as he can. That's the password. And so we're screaming for him to say pineapple. But it was 1 minute of storytelling.
Just saved his life.
That was life or death. And he located himself in the story, and it went. And we rinse and repeat for everything that happened. And I would bet you that most of the volunteers in the Afghan effort would tell you that it was some form of that over and over again.
So that just gave me goosebumps. So can you dive into a little bit more? Because I know you were part of the group that led the evacuation. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you did it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I said, I retired in 2013, had put Afghanistan behind me. Monty and I had moved on with our business, our nonprofit. Our play was actually about to come out as an Amazon film. So we were living our life away from Afghanistan and the military. We just, I still did a lot of restoration work with veterans, but I was not actively involved in Afghanistan. I guess that's my point. And then in the spring of 2021, my friend Nizam, who I had served with in Afghanistan, Afghan commando, he and I had stayed in touch over the years. This guy's amazing. Like his father was a mujahideen killed by the Soviets. His mother was sold into a forced marriage after that at 17 to a 75-year-old dude. Nizam slept in the barn until he was 11 with the animals. And then, his aunt told him, hey, you're a backpack man. Your home is wherever your backpack is. So he ran away from home at 11, lived on the streets of Tahlequan, working for his food. And then when he was 18, he joined the army of the Afghans because they had stood up after 9/11. They'd never had an army since the 70s. And he was so taken by him, kind of a soda shop moment, that he walked into the Afghan army recruiting office wearing women's high heel shoes because he was so small that it was the only way he could pass the height requirements. And the recruiter saw him and he's like, you got to be kidding me. But he did a waiver and he let Nizam in, and he was born for struggle, man. Like he was wired for it. He became a commando within a year, and then Afghan Special Forces, went to our Special Forces course, was shot like 5 times, defending Americans. And so everybody loved this dude. I loved him. And when he started contacting me in the spring of 2021 that everything was falling apart, he's given me a play-by-play, district by district, province by province is falling. I think the whole thing's going to flip in a month. He told me this was June. I found myself torn. Like I didn't want to get involved again because I had gone down such a dark path that I'd finally come out of. But yet this is my friend. I mean, this is a guy that had risked his life for us, had been shot defending us. And he's just going to be left on the side of the road, And so when Afghanistan collapsed in August of 2021, he called me and he said, sir, I'm hiding in my uncle's house like Anne Frank. He's about to throw me out because he thinks I'm compromising his family. The Taliban are texting my phone. He goes, our president's gone. Our generals are gone. Like I'm not afraid to die alone. I'm not afraid to die. I never thought I would die alone. And for me, that was just one of those moments that just hit me between the running lights. And I told him, I said, look, man, you're not going to die alone. You're not going to die at all. You're going to get across the city. We're going to get you through the crowd. You're going to get up to the gate. We're going to get you pulled in. And then you're going to come to the U.S., not just the U.S., but to Riverview, Florida. You're going to work in my nonprofit. You're going to be a story coach. Like you're going to be my neighbor. And, he didn't believe that any more than I believed that, but we needed some kind of connection. So that's what it was. And then when I got off the phone, I just contacted a couple of other buddies who were Green Berets that were veterans and active duty. And our common thread was Nizam.
That's amazing. We need to get Nizam on our
and
podcast.
Where is he now?
He's in Riverview, Florida.
No way.
We ultimately got him pulled through the wire. And then after that, we started a group of veterans, 150 of us total, that did the same thing, rinse and repeat for about 7 or 8 days. And we ended up somewhere between 750 to 1,000 that we got out.
Wow. The American government and political system is amazing in so many ways of what it's created and entrepreneurship and everything that we are today. But there's a consequence that's different than if you're Chinese and you have a vision and a set goal that's hundreds or thousands of years long, and how it comes down to execution and impact on the people that are following those orders, right? not to make it a political discussion, but you referenced that there was a change in how we were approaching Afghanistan. And in some, I guess the question is that a consequence of our political system to where we, every 2 to 4 years, we have a different change in direction? And if it is, can you just speak to how that casts down to the people that are executing it?
I think, first of all, let me be really clear. I'm about as apolitical as you can get on this issue and other issues that affect our nation and, you know, our stability as a civil society. And I say that because I spent almost 23 years. I had to be apolitical, right? You wore the uniform. That's how it had to be. And I still retain that now. And, you know, I served under multiple administrations in the Afghan war, both Republican and Democrat, and I found them to be remarkably underwhelming. All of them. They were not deep on the war. They were not committed. They did not take the time to understand it, from a bureaucratic level to a policy level to a politician level to a diplomatic level to a senior general and admiral level. They were all remarkably underwhelming compared to the folks that were fighting that war day after day, month after month, year after year. Like the difference, the chasm between the leaders and the led was astounding. All that to say that, to me, it really manifested hard in the collapse of Afghanistan when our allies, who we had made a promise to, were literally left abandoned. But if you look at America's history of partnering with other nations from Vietnam until present, we have a multi-generational, systemic habit of partner abandonment. We abandoned the Montagnards in Vietnam. We abandoned the Iranians when the Shah's regime fell. We abandoned the Kurds in Syria. We abandoned the Iraqi police and military. And most recently, we abandoned the Afghans. And this has happened under both parties. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I try to caution our institutional leaders on, and that I did in my congressional testimony, is you don't get a mulligan on this stuff, man. Like, this is the stuff our parents taught us in kindergarten. If you keep treating your friends this way, at some point you're going to look around when it gets bad and you're going to be alone. And that is my concern to your question at an institutional level, is this systemic multi-generational abandonment where we think that we can use somebody for our transactional goals and then just cast them aside, you know, like a piece of garbage. And that's becoming our reputation. All of that to say, I also believe that as business owners, as leaders in our community, as members of our family, sometimes you have to look around at what's happening in your arena when something's broken and go, okay, nobody's coming. I mean, that's what happened with Pineapple. We looked around and we saw nobody's coming. They are not coming over the hill on the white horse. No one is coming. So what are we going to do? Are you going to sit there and be a victim, or are you going to do something? And I think that's the larger call to action for the world that we live in today, is that for the most part, the problems that we face, the government aren't going to solve anyway. You know, so what do we, you know, if nobody's coming, then what are you going to do to step into the arena and lead at something bigger than yourself?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We become so dependent, or there's been a shift in our population to think the government's the solution for a lot of our problems.
That's the entitlement society, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, when's the last time you, seriously, like the time you woke up in the morning and you're like, man, thank God for Washington, D.C. Woo! Man, my life is so much better because of D.C. Like, you know, regardless of who's in power.
Yeah.
But yet we've become conditioned to somehow think that they're going to make our life remarkably better in the day-to-day. And the reality is they don't. I mean, the reality is it's our own leadership. Robert Putnam, in his book Bowling Alone, talks about a time in the early 1900s when America was at a very similar point. You know, that we were divided along the haves and the have-nots. Political partisanship was terrible. You had agrarian society moving into the cities because farms were failing. Immigration was out of control. Crime was rampant. And a lot of pundits in the early 1900s were saying, like, hey, America's on its last leg.
It's not going to work.
We're not going to make it.
Yeah.
And what Putnam talks about is about that time, shortly after that, you know, two drunks in Akron, Ohio, Dr. Bob and Bill W. decided that nobody was going to get them sober, so they had a meeting, and they called it Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, a similar formation happened not too far away with the Junior League and the Rotary Club and the Elks Club and the NAACP and Future Farmers of America, and like the longest running period of social capital in our nation's history. The clubs that we all grew up with, that our parents were part of, from like 1910 to 1972, started in that period because of Americans who looked around and said, nobody's coming. All right, we'll start this. And I think that's where we are right now, honestly. I think that's where we are in our society. Putnam agrees. He thinks that this downswing we've been on since 72, that we're due for an upswing. And I think Pineapple and these other veteran groups were the first shot across the bow. I choose to believe that. And I like what you guys are doing. I think that there is a movement across the country right now of people who see that nobody's coming. So, all right, well, what are we going to do about it? And when you think about the access that we have to technology and information right now, that's a marked advantage over what they had in the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. Like, we have platforms to be heard and mobilize people to action like never before. And to me, that's very exciting.
Absolutely. Well, let's turn to the play a little bit here. That's why you're in town. Why the last
out?
I don't know if that's but the last piece of this is it that taking a stage in an intimate audience, is that for you or is that for the people that are there? Both? Like, why a play?
Boy, if I had a dime for every time I've been asked that, and I still struggle to come up with the same answer every time. I think it's a multifaceted answer. But what I will say is this, that I've tried every form of storytelling you could think of. I've written books. I've spoken from the stage. I've been on the news. But for me, live theater is a very special thing. When you're trying to convey something that is very complex, like storytelling and what's going on with modern war and the impact on our warfighters, in a society that isn't really connected to our warfighters, theater is a way to do that like film and books just can't do. Now, the reason that it evolved for me was my mentor, Bo, who I had talked about earlier. Monty and I had already founded a nonprofit called The Hero's Journey, and we were helping warriors, family members, and first responders learn how to find their voice and tell their story similar to how I had. And so we were already doing this, but my mentor, Bo, was on me hard. He said, you need to write a play. That you need to write a play about your experience in the war, because I was still struggling and frustrated with the fact that people in our country didn't understand that we were still at war, that we were still sending our young men and women off to fight not only once, but like 8-9 tours, the same people, and their families were broken. And so he said, write a play. It'll heal you, even if it never sees the light of day. So finally, just to placate him, I started doing that. I started writing a play, and then Monty started getting involved with it, and she would give me insights on how the family is affected. And the whole gist of the play is my character, Danny Patton, is a master sergeant in Special Forces, and he's based on 3 team sergeants that I lost in the war that didn't make it home. He's a composite character, and he is mortally wounded in the first scene, and he's trying to ascend to the warrior resting place of Valhalla, which is where it's like a mythology. We always say to each other, until Valhalla, when we lose one. And he's trying to ascend, but he can't let go. He's holding on to something, so he's stuck in the purgatory between his fire base and his living room. And that's his purgatory, and he can't let go. So his best friend, Kenny, who was killed on 9/11 in the Pentagon, based on my best friend who was killed, comes down from Valhalla as what they call an operator. He's a shapeshifter, and he's specially trained to retrieve veterans who are stuck. And so he comes down with other operators who become the people in Danny's life that made his heart pump the most blood. His wife, Lynn, his son, Caden, his arch nemesis, Saeed Wali, and Colonel Smith. And so what happens is they take Danny through his life from the time he joins Special Forces, makes it through the Q course, 9/11, gets married, has his child, and then deployment after deployment after deployment. They keep taking him through. It's like a roller coaster, up and down, until he finally finds out what he's holding on to, and he's able to let go and know peace. And so in doing that, this audience that is civilians, veterans, combat veterans, Gold Star family members, Vietnam veterans, Republicans, Democrats, like they go for the whole ride. And, it's 2 hours and it is nonstop. And by the time it's over, when the lights come up and we're sitting there, covered in snot, sweat, and tears, the audience is literally like, they always come up in a standing ovation, but then we sit down for the talk back, and everybody just sits there and breathes. It's like we're breathing in unison.
That's cool.
And then we start to have this conversation. So to answer that's the premise of the play. I believe that play was gifted to me by my higher power and a lot of buddies that aren't around anymore. I can't even remember writing it. I just remember
Wow.
it's been evolution after evolution. You guys know the deal. When you're writing something or creating, it's like an iteration that you can't even really remember. But we did tour it on our own in 2019 in a U-Haul van, 28,000 miles,
Wow.
all veteran cast, 16 cities. We 75 Gold Star families of the fallen. It was performed for to include thousands of veterans and civilians, and then 250 post-traumatic stress interventions in the lobby with PTS victims. And then Gary Sinise.
That was intentional?
Yep. Well, the counselors were for us, were for the cast, because all of the cast members are veterans and have PTS, but we started seeing that in the lobby, there were people that weren't getting help. So our counselors would go out and use protocols with them to help them manage their emotions and their stress. And so that became part of the show, was that we would interact with each other and just look in each other's eyeballs and talk to each other. And if they needed an intervention, we did it. And then we turned it into a film that's on Amazon Prime during COVID.
What's it called?
Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. And Gary Sinise just happened to see it. And after Afghanistan collapsed, he reached out to me and he said, you know, I did a play like this called Tracers after Vietnam, and we used it to heal after Vietnam. This is a modern day Tracers. Let's put it on tour. And so he got behind it, and right now he's sponsoring a 6-month tour of the play, all veteran cast and military family members, and we're kicking it off in San Diego.
What a place to kick it off.
Right? Escondido Theater, the California Arts Center.
Yep.
In Escondido. And yeah, because what a huge veteran population here, but also a civilian population that has been so supportive of our veterans and wants to understand more what our veterans are going through. I will tell you guys this: last month in March, there were 88,000 calls to the VA crisis hotline. It's the most on record in VA history.
Wow.
More than COVID, more than the Afghanistan collapse. And like I testified to Congress, because of the way Afghanistan ended, 73% of veterans feel betrayed, 67% feel humiliated. You add that to the 22 a day, and we are sitting on a tsunami of veteran mental health. And storytelling is the way that we get through this. Storytelling is the way that we heal the moral injury, help civilians understand the role they can play, like Bo did with me. Storytelling is a way that we validate the injuries to our veterans and our military families and let them know we love them. And this event that's happening here in San Diego, I believe, is going to be one of many, and it's a chance for San Diego to be the first, in this tour and really help us blow this thing out of the water.
Who and how do you get connected to speak to Congress, and that they're realizing that your story has a place?
So I wrote Operation Pineapple Express. It became a New York Times bestseller. It got way more coverage than I ever thought it would. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about. I kept looking around thinking, I'm a 53-year-old storyteller. Like at one point, and I'm not even kidding, someone from the vice president's office called my cell phone asking me to help them get their favorite Afghan out of Afghanistan. And I'm like, you do realize you're talking to a retired dude on a cell phone, right? I mean, you guys have Delta Force in the hangar, turn them loose. But the point is, at some point, Monty and I looked at each other and we're like, nobody's coming. We're going to have to continue to try to be a voice for this, to try to speak truth to power on this thing. It's not right. And so I kept going on the news. I kept talking about it. And then when the testimony, when they decided to do public hearings, they reached out to me and they were actually just doing interviews, trying to understand the problem before the hearing. And then all of a sudden I got a call and they said, would you be willing to be on the panel to testify to Congress for the opening hearing? And I was like, good Lord.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we did. And that was about a month ago. And it was,
what was that like?
It was terrifying. I was angry. I was, fearful. I felt like an imposter. I didn't feel like normally those kind of testimonies are Secretary of State or, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs or someone like that. And, I'm a retired lieutenant colonel, and sitting beside me is, the Marine sniper that was blown up there, was an Army medic that had triaged the wounded. We were all the men and women who lived this on both sides of the pond, just telling our truth that the country hadn't heard. And I felt very honored in that sense. I felt, and I feel like it was very well received by both parties. The feedback I got from the nation was unbelievable. Like the support that I got from people all over the world, thanking us for that testimony and for telling the truth and the impact that it had on our veteran population. And now to be able to say to people, look, if you want to know why the Afghanistan abandonment happened, if you want to understand why Pineapple Express was written, come see this play. and you'll understand. You'll understand like never before.
Does a guy that's been through everything you've been through and done what you've done, you still get imposter syndrome?
Worse than I ever did. Worse than I ever did. And
Why is that?
I think because the stakes keep going up, and I keep realizing how much I don't know about anything. And I keep realizing that I'm just trying to do the best I can day by day, like anybody else. I don't have the market cornered on influence. I don't have a title. There's so many more people that are better than me at what I'm trying to do. And so all of that resistance, as Stephen Pressfield talks about, comes into mind, and I start second guessing myself. But what's changed is, as a storyteller, I've learned how to manage my own state through diaphragmatic breathing, things I've learned in the play. You talk about panic. I mean, like, I haven't done the show since January, and I'm already in a panic mode, and we don't even go till Friday. And I have to do hours and hours of breath work, managing my own state.
This is so funny. We do a lot of breath work.
Do you?
Both individually we do, but we also do it with our teams.
Yeah.
We bring them in a variety of platforms. We've done it with a Navy SEAL. We've held them ourselves where we take our team through it. His wife's a breath coach. She's done sessions. We put them in Wim Hof ice baths and teach them how to connect to these different things.
Game changer. Yeah. It's a game changer, because leadership is the management of energy, yours and those around you. And you have to lead yourself first. And most of the time in this modern world, we spend our time in a sympathetic state. We're in fight, flight, or freeze all the time, which is, humans are not designed for that. We're supposed to go into sympathetic state only when we're in duress or when we need it. These days, we stay in it because we're worried about
people live in it,
eroding over 9 months, so we stay in the red.
Yeah.
And so the only way we can manage, and if you do that, you look like you don't trust yourself. When you get in front of a client, when you get in front of another person, and you're in that state, you look like you don't trust yourself, and the other party can smell it on you, right? And so the only thing you can do is manage your own energy, and the way to manage your own energy is diaphragmatic breath. It's the number one way to bring yourself down to a parasympathetic state of calm and connect. Feel your feet on the floor, 3 new things in the room. And when you do that, you are present, you are intentional, you are looking out for the other person, and they know it, right? And so I deal with imposter syndrome and all of that stuff much differently than I used to, and I wish to God I had known about it when I was a Green Beret.
It's funny because we take all these sports teams over here. We take the kids through a breathing. So the first time I did this, my wife's like, I know you've been doing this Wim Hof stuff, but you really think you're going to teach kids? She's saying the opposite of imposter syndrome. She's like, are you qualified to do this? And I'm like, I don't even know. But if I started learning at 8 and not at 35, it would have had a more intentional impact on my life.
Yeah.
So we teach the kids how to box breathe, how to oxygenate, and we throw them in 48 degrees for 3 full minutes.
Yeah.
Because I can't introduce trauma of being on the pitching mound in a championship game with the game on the line. But you can put them in physical trauma in cold water.
Spot on.
And then they have to connect to the breath work or they're not going to make it. It's
Good.
hard.
It's so good. And it's what we do with the play. And I'm telling you, high performance, that's where it's going. I work with a breath coach, Dr. Belisa Veronich. She wrote Breathing for Warriors. You guys should check her out too. It's really great.
You definitely need to.
But no, we are on the same page with that. And what I would just say is, no matter what your high stakes situation is, whether you're talking with a teenager who's been bullied online, or whether you're getting in front of a client, or whether you're presenting, how you prepare to show up is 2/3 of the engagement. And how you manage your state and get yourself ready to go. I also do, in addition to 3 diaphragmatic breaths before I take the stage or the microphone, I also say out loud 3 times, I have time. And it's a temporal pacing tool that slows me down and leaves the baggage from the last meeting behind me, not in the meeting I'm in. And then I ask myself,
try that one.
I ask myself 3 questions out loud, and I answer them. Who am I? Why am I here? And what does this person need from me? Right? So by asking who I am, I've revalidated my identity before I walk in the room. The best antibody to imposter syndrome is to state who you are. Yep. Then I say why I'm here, because we're meaning-seeking creatures. So I remind myself of my purpose, because how many times do we walk in a meeting and we don't even know why we're there? Or we haven't re-familiarized ourselves with it. And then the final one is, what do they need from me? The best way to engage in a high-stakes situation in storytelling or anything is to get out of the worst place you can be is in your own head. In your own head, you look like you don't trust yourself. But if I put it out here, and I think my last conscious thought was, what does she need from me? And that was the last conscious thought I had as I walked in the room. My physicality gives that off.
Yeah.
And it's an intention. The intention is now different. I'm walking in the room, not thinking about how am I doing, how is she doing, and what does she need?
And you're ready to give energy, right? Because
Totally.
then you receive
You're
it back.
giving energy instead of trying to take it from them.
Yeah.
And it is as palpable as a spoken word, if not more.
You just did
That's
the
awesome.
full. It's interesting that your nonprofit's called The Hero's Journey, you know, around the storytelling of writing plays and movies on the hero's journey. And you kind of saw it happen from being a 14-year-old, I forgot how you categorize yourself, like frail little
Runt.
kid,
Yeah,
kind of runt, to then you just described your physicality playing a role in it. You know, like that's that hero's journey.
Yeah, it totally is. It's been definitely, I do believe that I have lived my own hero's journey. I'm still living it. I think that if you've ever read any Stephen Pressfield, I highly recommend it. The War of Art, Turning Pro, and then another book called The Artist's Journey. But what I love about what Steve Pressfield says in The Artist's Journey is that all of us have a hero's journey. And then we live that, and then we return home to the shore, right, with a gift for the people.
Right.
And then what is in the wake of that hero's journey? Right, that next level that we can do where we actually kind of know what we're doing and we can actually give back in a way. And it's a new journey, but it's one we ride to the end of the line. It's the one we ride that we play the higher game. And I feel like that's what I'm on now. And it's terrifying. And I have no clue what I'm doing. I really don't. But I just try to follow my higher power and where I'm being led, and just try to do the next right thing.
So what's the next right thing?
This play, and at Rooftop Leadership, which is our for-profit that we teach interpersonal skills, our mission is 10 million inspired rooftop leaders in 10 years. In other words, 10 million people who have a renewed understanding and appreciation for purpose-based intentional human connection. They're thinking about connection as a skill, right? So that's on that side. On the nonprofit side, it is to really open America's eyes to the cost of modern war, and to bring storytelling as a tool to heal our veterans and bring our communities together around our veterans and love up on them and bring them home. And that's my other side.
Well, you got 4 of your 10 million sitting in the room, so it's a small piece, but every life counts, right?
Everyone, yeah, because you guys are catalysts, and
absolutely.
And that's the other thing,
absolutely,
is that I learned as a Green Beret is that when you connect with catalysts, those people who are as obsessed about making connections as they are about solving the problem, it's exponential.
Yep, casting a net.
All right, let's start with favorite word in another language.
Amor.
Love.
Love. Yeah,
I actually knew that word. Most words.
I was proud of them.
Many of the words you use today, I don't know, and I have to infer what they mean, but I knew that one. If you only go to one store for a month, which store would you go to?
Fresh Market.
All right.
Yeah. Because they have everything that we love to eat for like our favorite meals or barbecuing and stuff. Like we could go in there and just lose our minds.
Love it.
So what is something you just regret spending money on?
Oh man. Oh my God. The mirror. I'm sorry if there's any people out there, but that has been, it's just a mirror.
Yeah, I have one of those too.
It's a really expensive mirror.
I remember you bragging about it in the beginning.
Yeah,
the workout mirror, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not so much.
So when you go to Fresh Market, the only place you're going for a month, what's the best dish you cook with the ingredients you get?
Oh, without a doubt, it is the prime filet that Monty and I have been cooking on the grill for 28 years straight.
Now I want some food. You just got hungry.
All right, what's the best concert you've ever attended?
The best concert I have ever attended?
Yeah.
Kid Rock.
Oh yeah,
Love
I love
it.
Kid
Just
Rock.
went to see him at 53, and the dude was amazing. Regardless of your politics, like that dude put on a show. I have never. I was so proud of him because we're the same age, and it really reinvigorated me to realize that you can go a lot longer than people think you can.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna do an add-on question here. What percentage of the time when you have your dreaming visions does Monty just shoot them down and ground you?
Probably, honestly, 50%. If there's a way she's going to make it happen, she's going to make it happen. We've even talked about that, like she probably needs to shoot them down more. because she goes so far to try to make it happen that it takes a toll on her and the team. But 50% maybe.
Is that accurate, Monty?
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good number. That's balance in a relationship, right? And then when you commented on the pineapples earlier, did that connect us to your book or what?
Oh yeah, I mean, everywhere I go now, like whenever I see pineapples, because that's just become kind of the my battle cry to leaders today is, what's your Pineapple Express? When we saw that veterans were going to have to bail out our allies and the government wasn't coming, that was our Pineapple Express. What's yours? Because if I think if we started asking ourselves that question as citizens, when we realize nobody else is coming, it could totally change the way our country operates.
Absolutely.
So this next part is about, really reflecting back on your younger self, and knowing what you know now. What kind of advice would you give to your younger self?
Be kind to yourself. Because you're going to need it later.
I love that.
Don't empty the tank.
Yeah.
Podcast called Discover the Difference. So you just went through the discover part. What's in the secret sauce that makes Scott Mann who he is? Human connection and storytelling. That's the secret sauce. And if you apply it in a way that's authentic and intentional, no matter what you do in this world, you're going to find that people see you as more relatable to their pain and more relevant to their goals. And that's what people follow when they're scared and when they're hurting.
I love it how you can just feel your energy and your emotion. What is that, when we're asking these questions, what is that experience? What are you feeling?
It's, in a way, it's scary, but I've just learned through so many of my failures and struggles and the use of storytelling in the service of other people that I'm just an instrument. I'm going to be gone, at some point, and the only thing that remains are the stories. That's all that's left, and if you just don't take yourself so seriously and just realize that I'm just an instrument. I'm just an instrument that has a very, very limited lease here, and I have the opportunity to play at levels that are only limited by my own imagination. And a lot of good can be done as long as I don't take myself seriously. And as long as I realize it's not about me, it's about me being an instrument for something else. And that feels terrifying. It feels invigorating, but most of all, it just feels right. And after what the journey I've had, that's all I want anymore. That's all I care about.
That's awesome.
Very cool. Good way to close. So we'll link in all the different media contents. Where's some of the key places that people should go to discover and or reach out to you?
The big one is scottmann.com. Finally, we brought it all under that, and that has just been such a game changer for us. Everything there, from how to get the book, our nonprofit, my podcast that I do where we talk deeply on this stuff. On storytelling and that kind of stuff, my TED Talks, so scottmann.com. And then for the sake of the play, I would say if people would go to the GarySiniseFoundation.org, that's where we're asking people to go for, the tickets and that kind of thing. And we're going all over the country for 6 months. So you can find out all you need there. And also, if you want, you can go to the Escondido Theater. They have tickets there as well. But scottmann.com would be like the main one.
So the play's here in San Diego this weekend?
May 5 and 6 at 7 o'clock on the Friday, and then afternoon at 3, and then again 7 o'clock on Saturday night. And then we also run a storytelling workshop for veterans Saturday morning from the local area, which is really cool. And Gary Sinise Foundation is going to have all of their programs set up in the lobby. So everything from mental health to addiction. I mean, they've got some amazing programs. Snowball Express for families of the fallen. I invite people, if nothing else, just come see what Gary Sinise is doing for our veterans and how you can get involved.
You have a relationship with the Honor Foundation?
I do. I haven't talked with those guys in a while. I actually came out here and gave a talk to the Honor Foundation several years ago on storytelling.
Yeah.
I love those guys. I think they are the gold standard for special operations transition. They have defined for the rest of us what it's supposed to look like. And I am huge fans. I think some of them are coming.
We should make sure that they send it out on their alumni. They have an alumni list that they can send
I
out
hope
to.
they will, because even though this says Elegy of a Green Beret, they will absolutely locate themselves.
I think they said they had like 600 and some veterans in Southern California.
I mean, I would love to have them come like on Saturday afternoon and just fill the whole theater up with SEALs.
Yeah, we'll reach out to them after this. That would be amazing.
Yeah, and just please contact me, and we'll, like I said, we've got quite a few openings on Saturday. We could fill the whole thing up Saturday afternoon with them and do it just for them.
That'd be awesome. All right, great. Well, hey, thanks so much for coming in, Scott.
Thank
really
you guys.
appreciate it.
Thank
it was
you. This was a lot of fun.
eye-opening. That's amazing.
Cool.